and a highly versatile design. Ships with a pair of powerful Pure Wings 2 fans and intentional support for 360 radiators. Click the link in the description for more info.
What's cracking, people? Welcome back to the channel. Hope you're all doing well. Today we are building a full-blown system from the ground up. The objective of this build is going to be so that theoretically those of you who might be building a system of your own at home can assemble it almost in real time as you watch me build mine. And so this is really just to help those of you who are maybe new to PC building, if it's your first time, or if you just need a refresher on how to assemble this stuff. So hopefully that makes sense, and it's going to be a lengthier video because of that. It's just more of a casual and relaxed environment to teach users or new users how to build a PC. I will say that even if you're not building a Ryzen system, so I'm building an AMD Ryzen PC, even if you're building an Intel-based computer, you can still apply 95% of what I'm going to be doing today to your system. It doesn't really matter. The only real differences are the CPU installation, which is a breeze on either platform, and CPU cooler installation, which in itself can vary greatly even on the same platform depending on which manufacturer of cooler you're going with. So that being said, ladies and gentlemen, am I just building this computer just for you guys? No, of course not. This is actually going to be my cousin's gaming PC that I helped him assemble, or that I helped him pick out the parts for. I actually did a video, you can go ahead and check that out, where I sort of make a parts list, and that parts list looks drastically different from the hardware you see before me because I went back to the drawing board several times and was like, no, that doesn't make sense. That's stupid. So I've swapped it out from, it was originally going to be an Intel system, and now it's AMD Ryzen. What do you know? It just seemed to make more sense with his budget and stuff. For those of you curious, the build we're looking at today is around $1,200 MSRP, you know, give or take $100 or so, depending on the prices, how they fluctuate all the time and stuff. But let's go ahead and go over the parts, shall we? One by one. I'm going to do it really quick because we've got a lot of building to do right afterwards. So first off, our CPU of the hour is the Ryzen 5 1600. It's a 6-core, 12-thread part. It boosts up to 3.6 gigahertz. I am going to try to push that a bit further with a manual overclock for Brandon. He's not into overclocking. He's not too familiar with it, so I'm going to try to squeeze the most performance out of it as I can with the help of this cooler. Now, this was originally the cooler that Brandon bought and paid for. Is this one right here. This is the CryoRig H7, a really great price to performance cooler. However, I forgot to tell Brandon to also pick up or order an AM4 bracket to go along with it because it doesn't come with one, so it's not supported with Ryzen natively out of the box. So it's going to take probably a few weeks for that bracket to get here. So in the meantime, we're using this Noctua NH U12S. Fantastic cooler. Brandon can decide if he wants to keep this one or swap it out for the H7 once the bracket arrives and that sort of thing. So that takes care of that. We've also got a B350 Tomahawk motherboard from MSI. This is a fantastic little budget board. I believe that this is one of the ones that has a PLX chip, so it supports Crossfire and all that jazz. It's a really nice sort of a black and red color scheme. Actually, the red is very subtle on the VRM heatsinks. Probably shouldn't clash with anything else in the rig, but fantastic little board here that is going to be paired with the GTX 1070 Super Clock Edition from good old EVGA. This is still, I think, one of the more affordable 1070s that you can find on the market. However, it's a blazing fast card, and it's certainly going to kick ass and raid some frames for today's system. The memory kit, I almost forgot about that down there. It's a the 16 gigabyte kit. Where'd you get that 18 gigabyte kit from? 16 gig kit of G.Skill Ripjaws 5, DDR4 at 3000 megahertz. I am also going to try to overclock that to 3200, as that does help Ryzen in gaming performance some. Hopefully the B350 Tomahawk here is able to handle that. Our storage configuration consists of 2 drives, the first of which being a 250 gig WD Blue. That's actually an SSD, not a mechanical hard drive like you might have thought at first. Yeah, WD makes freaking SSDs now, and they actually call them the same name as their mechanical drives, which is super confusing. But nonetheless, this should be a pretty sweet SSD. I've never used it before personally or tested it, so hopefully it works and it's fast enough. And we've got a 1 terabyte WD Black mechanical hard drive for his for all the games and stuff. Obviously, the heavy storage needs media, that sort of thing. I should mention that we are installing Windows 10 64-bit on that SSD as well. We've got the Seasonic G-Series 650 watt power supply. This is a modular unit and 80 plus gold certified, yo. So incredibly power efficient. And it's also, what was I going to say? It's a Seasonic. Seasonic is a great power supply brand. They are very reputable. So hopefully this one will handle this this particular system just fine. And then finally, our case of the hour is the NZXT S340 Elite in white. I gave Brandon a couple options. He really wanted a white case, so I gave him this one along with like 3 or 4 other popular white cases. And this is the one he came out with. Was like, this is the one, this one right here. And I completely agree. I love this case myself. I've built a couple systems in it already. It's got a beautiful tempered glass side panel. It's got radiator support at the front in case he wants to upgrade the cooling solution later down the line. And it's just a really nice chassis for not too much money. And then finally, just to give ourselves a little bit of an aesthetic bump for the rig, I have included some Fantex white sleeved extension cables to make things look nice and pretty. Oh, there's one more thing. As a thank you to Brandon for letting me build his rig and film it on the channel, I am throwing in, free of charge, an NZXT Hue Plus RGB LED unit, which is probably the biggest, baddest, most awesome RGB accessory you can add to a system here in 2017. So that's going to definitely spice things up and add some bling. Definitely going to give us a bling factor for today's build. But those are all the parts, ladies and gentlemen. So I'm done rambling. I'm going to go ahead and start building. So if you guys, those of you who are building your own systems at home right now, what I'm going to suggest is that you grab your CPU, aka your desktop processor, and your main board or your motherboard, because that's generally where I like to start in a given build. So let's start there. All right, y'all. So you can see that I've taken the CPU somewhat out of its packaging. You want to make sure not to touch it unless you absolutely have to. So it's still sort of in a little box for now. But I've also removed the motherboard from its anti-static sleeve. And you'll notice that there's a bunch of other stuff on this table. I'm going to go over everything. But when you take your motherboard out of its box, you want to also take out a few important accessories along with it so that they're just on hand when you're ready for them. The first of which is your motherboard I/O shield, and we're going to see what this exactly is for in just a bit, as well as your SATA cables. I would take out a number of SATA cables equivalent to the number of 2.5-inch or 3.5-inch drives that you'll be connecting to your system. So in our instance, we've got 2 drives, one SSD, and one mechanical hard drive. So I've actually pulled out all 4 of the cables since they come connected. But you can take those out as well. And then your motherboard manual. So this is the Tomahawk manual. You might need to consult it at some point. And then the other stuff on here, these are just sort of like tools that I use when building a computer. The only one you absolutely need, well, let me get the CPU out of here. That's not a tool, really. So we've got the one you really need is a screwdriver. You need a Phillips head screwdriver. This is a number 2 Phillips head screwdriver. Any sort of length will do, but I generally prefer a slightly longer one. Woohoo! Just to makes it a little bit easy when screwing in screws and stuff. But magnetic tip also helps a lot. Not required, but definitely appreciated. Makes things a bit easier. And then we've also got some cable management accessories. Here. So zip ties, generally there's at least one or two components in your build that will come with zip ties, but they're usually very few of them and they're not like the right length or they're too cheap and stuff like that. So I have my own on hand. Again, this is not necessary, just kind of creates a cleaner build for the cable management part. And then I've got some Velcro ties in case I need them. And then, of course, some wire cutters to cut the zip ties and stuff. A pair of scissors also works just as fine. Don't use a knife, that could be dangerous. So those are the things that we are going to be using for this build. And on that note, we can actually install our CPU. All right, so here's a close-up look at our CPU socket. And this is basically where the CPU gets physically mounted or inserted on the motherboard. And this one in particular is the AM4 socket. AM4 is only compatible with AMD Ryzen CPUs, at least at the time of filming. So don't bother putting in a non-Ryzen AMD chip or an Intel chip, God forbid. Bad things will happen if you do. So just stick to Ryzen for AM4 and you'll be good to go. So if you are building an Intel rig right now, I would suggest going to some sort of tutorial. Maybe I'll link one. I'll put a card somewhere if I can find a good tutorial on how to do that on the Intel platform. But for ZIF sockets for Ryzen, it's really quite simple on your CPU, particularly on the top. You don't want to touch this top heat spreader here. That's a no-no. You want to grab it from the sides. So here's the CPU, all right? You can grab the edges. Edges are fine. Also, do not touch the golden contacts, the golden pins, I should say, on the bottom. All right, that's a no-no as well. That's very important. You want to keep that as clean as possible. The way you want to do this now is you want to take note of the golden triangle. There's a golden triangle on one of the corners of the CPU. And you want to match that with the small, tiny-ass triangle in the corner of the socket. You can see there's a tiny little corner, or I'm sorry, yeah, a little arrow right in the corner there. That's going to match up with the gold arrow on your CPU. So the way you want to do this is grab it with one hand, one finger on each side. I use my thumb and my index, and you just go straight down into the socket. You'll notice that the pins, you have pins on the bottom and you have pin holes in the socket. So obviously you're going to be slotting all those pins into all those holes, and it should just drop down. It should feel snug. It should feel like it's in there, and you can give it a little wiggle to make sure that it's fully down. Looks good. And then you take the lever and you just push it back to where it was. There will be a little bit of pressure. Don't let it scare you though. And once the lever locks back into place, voila, you've just installed a CPU. Now some CPUs, including the one that we're using today, come included with a stock cooler. And this one in particular comes with the AMD Wraith Spire, which is a fantastic stock cooler, but we're using something a little bit better. We're using that Noctua cooler that I mentioned earlier at the beginning of the video, so we actually don't need these mounting bars. These mounting bars on either side of the socket, those are for the stock cooler, but we don't need those. We want to make way for the Noctua cooler bracket, so we're going to actually remove these by unscrewing each of the screws. There's 2 screws on either side, and upon removing them, the mounting bracket should pop off just like that. Do the same thing for the other side. So we are going to want to keep the AM4 backplate in place because that's how we're going to mount our third-party air cooler here. And this is where things get a little tricky because there's no standard method for installing CPU coolers. It all sort of differs based on the manufacturer. This Noctua cooler installation will be vastly different than an NZXT cooler versus a Thermaltake cooler versus a Phanteks cooler, a Corsair cooler, and so forth. So this is really the only part in the build where I'm going to have to leave you guys on your own, I promise. So at this point, I want you to consult the manual that came with your air cooler or liquid cooler and follow it to a T. Follow the instructions there and you should be good to go. Make sure that you're also following the instructions in that manual that pertain to your particular socket. So again, we're running AM4 right here. If you're using LGA 1155 with Intel or LGA 2011, then you want to make sure that you're reading the right instructions for that socket. But before I let you go and off to your own installation with the cooler, I will teach you how to apply thermal paste. And it's fairly simple. Thermal paste is basically a thermal interface material that basically is a heat conductor between the heat spreader of the CPU and the base plate of your cooler. It basically allows for heat transfer between your CPU and the cooler so that you get better absorption, better dissipation, and superior thermals. If you don't use thermal paste, you're going to have a bad day. You always, always, always want to use a proper application of thermal paste. So what you want to do, I have a little plunger here. Yours probably looks a little similar. I like to do the grain of rice method. So straight in the middle, it's just how it sounds. You want a grain of rice size of thermal paste. You can go a little bit bigger. I would say grain of rice works for LGA 1151, for example, and similar, because it's a smaller chip, and you don't really need that much. Ryzen's slightly bigger of a heat spreader, so we're gonna do the green pea method. The green pea method is slightly bigger than the grain of rice. Bada bing, bada boom. Beautiful. All right, and ideally, the theory here is that once you push this thing down, once you smack it down on the CPU, it's just going to spread it across the entire heat spreader. And so you'll actually get much fuller coverage than what it looks like right now. So on that note, why don't you go ahead and install your CPU cooler while I install mine, and we'll meet back afterwards. Sound good? All right, go for it. Good luck. I believe in you.